Did he admit to you that he murdered his family?
He absolutely did.
Anything about getting married?
To me?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a thing where it was like offhandedly, like one day maybe this will happen. But again, it was like these were, I did not take these as very like deep conversations. It wasn't like this is when we're going to get married. This is what's going to go on.
What if everything you thought you knew about the Chris Watts case was wrong? Not partially wrong, completely wrong. Because tonight, we're not talking about rumors. We're not talking about internet theories. And we're definitely not talking about the version of events that most people have been repeating for years. We're talking about a diary. A diary that wasn't supposed to be seen. A diary that allegedly contains details capable of turning one of the most controversial cases in modern true crime history completely upside down. And at the center of the storm, one name, Nichole Kessinger. For years, she remained on the edge of the news. Never in the spotlight. Never officially accused. Never forced to answer the questions that continue to spread across forums, documentaries, podcasts, and social media. But now, people are asking a very different question. What if the biggest mystery was never Chris Watts himself? What if the real mystery was a person standing just outside the frame? Because hidden inside newly discussed writings, forgotten timelines, unexplained phone activity, and a trail of strange coincidences, there appears to be a news that nobody saw coming. A news that raises more questions than answers. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why thousands of people still refuse to believe this case is as simple as it appears. The strange thing about secrets is that they rarely stay buried. Sometimes they hide for years. Sometimes they hide behind official statements. And sometimes they hide in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice the detail everyone else ignored. That is exactly what began happening in Frederick, Colorado. At first, people believed the news was finished. Chris Watts was behind bars. The headlines had faded. The cameras had disappeared. The public had moved on. Case closed. At least that was the narrative. But then researchers started revisiting old records. Not because they expected to find anything new, because they couldn't stop finding things that didn't make sense. And every road seemed to lead back to the same person, Nichole Kessinger, a woman who had spent years avoiding public attention, a woman who had never spoken extensively about the events after everything collapsed, a woman whose name continued appearing in conversations that refused to die. The deeper people looked, the stranger things became. One timeline didn't match another. One statement appeared to contradict a previous statement. One question led to 5 more. Soon, online communities became obsessed. Forums exploded. Videos accumulated millions of views. Entire channels dedicated themselves to re-examining the case. And suddenly a disturbing possibility emerged. What if there were pieces of the news that never made it into the public spotlight? The first major controversy centered around timing. Not actions, not evidence. Timing. According to records discussed by independent researchers, Nichole's version of events appeared straightforward, simple, clean, easy to understand. Yet some observers noticed something unusual. Certain digital activity seemed to suggest she had been paying attention to Chris long before she later claimed. Was it innocent curiosity, coincidence, or something else entirely? Nobody knew, and that uncertainty became fuel for endless speculation. Then came another detail, one that sent true crime communities into absolute chaos. A series of searches, not criminal, not illegal, but strangely specific. Specific enough that people began asking why they existed in the first place. The internet immediately did what the internet always does. It went completely insane. One side insisted the searches meant nothing. The other side argued they revealed a much larger news. Arguments erupted everywhere. Thousands of comments, thousands of theories, thousands of accusations. The debate refused to end. But then something happened that pushed the controversy to another level. A former inmate named Dylan Tolman appeared with the news that nobody expected. According to him, Chris had spent months discussing details that had never been publicly addressed. Most people ignored the claims at first. Why wouldn't they? Prison stories appear all the time. Most go nowhere. Most disappear within days. This one didn't, because Dylan wasn't making vague claims. He was making specific ones. and specific claims are dangerous, especially when they begin matching details that people had already been arguing about for years. Almost overnight, curiosity became obsession. Podcasters covered it. Commentators debated it. Independent researchers began digging through every available document they could find. And with every new discussion, Nichole Kessinger's name returned to the center of attention. The mystery grew even larger when conversations shifted towards Survey 319. For years, the location had been viewed as another piece of the timeline. Nothing more, nothing less. Then people began noticing references that seemed unusually detailed. Questions emerged. Why was Survey 319 discussed so often? Why did certain conversations appear focused on that specific location? Why did some observers believe it carried more significance than originally understood? No one could agree, but everyone wanted answers. Meanwhile, Frederick, Colorado was experiencing a completely different phenomenon. Residents were becoming tired of the attention. The town had become synonymous with controversy. Tourists arrived looking for locations mentioned online. Content creators filmed documentaries. Internet detectives examined maps, timestamps, and public records. Every few months, a new theory appeared. Every few months, another viral video reignited debate. The news refused to die. Then came the diary, or at least the alleged diary. Nobody could agree on exactly what it contained. Some believed it held explosive revelations. Others argued it contained nothing meaningful at all. Yet the mere possibility of its existence changed everything. Because once people believed there might be hidden information, they started questioning everything they thought they knew. Every statement, every timeline, every interview, every unexplained detail. Everything became fair game, and that's when anonymous sources began appearing. Some claimed there were conversations that had never been publicly discussed. Others insisted important details had been misunderstood from beginning. Several even suggested that the public narrative was incomplete. Notice something important. Not one of these sources agreed with each other. Yet somehow they all pointed toward the same conclusion. Something about the news felt unfinished. That perception alone was enough to keep the controversy alive. Months turned into years. Years turned into endless debates. And still no definitive answers emerged. Meanwhile, Nichole remained silent. No interviews. No public explanations, and no detailed responses. Nothing. The silence became its own news. Critics interpreted it one way. Supporters interpreted it another. Everyone saw what they wanted to see. And because of that, the mystery only grew larger. Then another unexpected twist surfaced. Researchers reviewing old communications noticed references to a late-night conversation that lasted far longer than anyone expected. Hours. Not minutes. Hours. What was discussed? Nobody knew. Why was it important? Nobody could prove. But the existence of the conversation was enough to create another wave of speculation. The internet exploded again. Some called it irrelevant. Others called it the missing piece. The arguments became louder. The theories became wilder. The controversy became impossible to ignore. And through it all, one question continued haunting the case. Not whether Chris Watts was responsible for his actions. That question had already been answered. The question people couldn't stop asking was something entirely different. How much of the news do we actually know? Because every time researchers believed they had reached the end, another unanswered question appeared. Another timeline surfaced. Another detail resurfaced. Another theory emerged. And each one pushed the mystery deeper into territory nobody expected. By now, millions of people had heard pieces of the news, but very few had seen the full picture. And what happened next would transform a lingering controversy into something much bigger. Because behind closed doors, new discussions were beginning. Discussions that threatened to reopen questions many believed had been buried forever. And once those questions started spreading, there was no putting them back. The problem with unanswered questions is that they never stay unanswered for long. Eventually, somebody starts digging. And in Frederick, Colorado, that digging had reached a level nobody expected. By now, online researchers weren't just looking at timelines. They were comparing statements, cross-referencing interviews, building digital maps, analyzing every known movement connected to the case. And what they believe they found sent shockwaves through the community. It started with a single claim, a claim so controversial that even veteran true crime commentators refused to touch it at first. According to anonymous sources circulating online, investigators may have overlooked a chain of events that connected several seemingly unrelated details. At first glance, those details appear harmless, ordinary, forgettable, but when placed together, they created a pattern. And patterns have a dangerous habit of attracting attention. The first detail involved communications. Lots of communications. Calls, messages, conversations, some lasting only minutes, others lasting hours. Researchers began asking the same question over and over again. If everything was normal, why did so much activity suddenly appear around the most critical period in the timeline? Nobody could explain it. Then came another twist, an alleged internal memo. Nobody could verify where it originated. Nobody could prove it was authentic. But that didn't stop it from spreading like wildfire. The document claimed that multiple investigators privately disagreed about key aspects of the case. Within hours, screenshots flooded social media. Videos appeared everywhere. Comment sections exploded. Some people called it nonsense. Others called it proof that bigger questions existed. The internet once again chose chaos. Then the anonymous sources returned, this time with a much bigger allegation. They claimed that several individuals connected to the case had been quietly distancing themselves from old associates for years, changing routines, changing contact information, avoiding public appearances, avoiding interviews, avoiding attention altogether. To supporters, this meant nothing. To critics, it meant everything. The debate became impossible to control. Soon, every action became suspicious. Every silence became suspicious. Every coincidence became suspicious. And that was exactly when the situation spiraled. A popular commentator released a 3-hour breakdown. The video immediately went viral. Millions of views. Millions. People couldn't stop watching. Not because answers were being provided, because questions were multiplying. One question in particular seemed impossible to escape. What happened during the missing hours? Nobody agreed on the answer. Everyone had a theory, and every theory sounded more dramatic than the last. Some claimed secret meetings occurred. Others suggested hidden conversations. A few believed there were individuals who knew more than they ever admitted publicly. Proof? None. Speculation? Endless. Then came the leaked audio. Or at least what people called leaked audio. Nobody knew where it came from. Nobody knew who recorded it. The recording itself was unclear. Fragments of voices, incomplete sentences, background noise, nothing definitive. Yet somehow it became the center of discussion across the entire internet. Experts debated it. Commentators analyzed it. Reaction channels reacted to other reaction channels reacting to it. The situation became almost absurd. And still the controversy continued growing. Meanwhile, another news was developing behind the scenes. Former employees connected to Anadarko Petroleum allegedly began receiving requests from independent researchers. Questions, lots of questions. Questions about schedules. Questions about work assignments. Questions about procedures. Most declined to comment. A few offered vague statements. None provided certainty. But uncertainty was exactly what fueled the mystery. Then something unexpected happened. A former contractor appeared during a live stream. Nobody recognized the individual. Their face remained hidden. Their voice was altered. But the claims they made captured immediate attention. They suggested there were conversations taking place behind closed doors long before the public became aware of the situation. Again, no proof. Again, no verification. Yet millions watched. Millions shared clips. Millions argued. The news became larger than the original case itself. Now, people weren't discussing facts. They were discussing possibilities. And possibilities are far more powerful online, because possibilities never have to end. The controversy reached another level when financial rumors entered the picture. Anonymous accounts began alleging that unusual transactions had occurred around the same time period. Expensive purchases, unexpected travel, mysterious payments. Every day, a new rumor appeared. Every day, another theory gained traction. The public couldn't get enough. It felt less like an investigation and more like a puzzle nobody could solve. Yet through all the noise, one thing remained remarkably consistent. Nichole Kessinger never responded. Not publicly, not directly, not in a way that satisfied anyone. Her silence became the loudest voice in the news. Supporters argued she owed nobody an explanation. Critics argued the opposite. The divide became enormous. Friendships ended over arguments. Communities split apart. Entire channels formed opposing camps. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos sat a single question. The same question that had haunted Frederick, Colorado from the beginning. What if everyone was looking in the wrong place? Because while people argued about theories, while commentators chased rumors, while anonymous sources flooded the internet, a small group of researchers noticed something strange, something hiding in plain sight, something connected to the timeline, something connected to Survey 319, something connected to events that occurred shortly before everything changed forever. At first, they dismissed it. Then they looked closer, and the closer they looked, the more uncomfortable the discovery became. Because if their interpretation was correct, it meant one of the biggest assumptions surrounding the entire case might have been wrong from the very beginning. And that possibility was about to send the controversy into territory nobody saw coming. Be why at this point, the controversy had taken on a life of its own. What began as a handful of unanswered questions had transformed into something much bigger, something louder, something impossible to ignore. Because now people weren't simply asking what happened. They were asking whether the entire timeline had been misunderstood from the start. And that question terrified everyone, not because it provided answers, because it threatened to create even more questions. The small group of independent researchers who had been studying the case for years claimed they had identified a sequence of events that nobody had focused on before. Not a smoking gun, not definitive proof. A sequence, a pattern. And according to them, patterns are where the truth likes to hide. The discovery centered around a series of moments that seemed insignificant when viewed separately. A phone call here, a statement there, a timeline adjustment, a missing explanation. Nothing shocking on its own, but together, the picture looked very different. The internet immediately split into two sides. One side insisted the researchers had uncovered something important. The other accused them of seeing connections where none existed. The battle became relentless. Videos appeared daily. Podcasts released emergency episodes. Comment sections turned into war zones. And through it all, one phrase kept appearing over and over again. What are we missing? That phrase became the unofficial slogan of the mystery, because every answer seemed to create three new questions. Then came another unexpected development. A private journal allegedly connected to Chris what became the center of attention. Nobody could fully verify every claim surrounding it. Yet passages discussed online appear to suggest that Chris viewed certain events very differently than the public narrative. Immediately, speculation exploded. What did the journal really mean? Who had access to it? Why were people discussing it now? The questions spread faster than the answers. And that's when the strangest part happened. Instead of calming down, the controversy intensified. Researchers revisited old interviews, old statements, old timelines, looking for anything they might have missed. Some believed they found inconsistencies. Others saw nothing unusual. But one thing became impossible to deny. Interest in the case was bigger than ever. Years after the original events, years after the headlines disappeared, people were still searching, still debating, still questioning. And perhaps that's what made this mystery different. Most stories fade. This one refused. Every attempt to close the book seemed to open a new chapter. Every conclusion seemed temporary. Every answer seemed incomplete. Meanwhile, Frederick, Colorado continued living under the shadow of a news that would not disappear. Tourists still visited. Documentaries still aired. Commentators still argued. And online communities still analyzed every detail, as if the next breakthrough was only one clue away. Whether that breakthrough would ever come remained unknown. But the anticipation was undeniable, because somewhere between the rumors, the theories, the speculation, and the unanswered questions, People became convinced that there was still something left to uncover, something important, something hidden, or perhaps something everyone had overlooked. And maybe that's the real reason this news continues to captivate millions. Not because people know the truth, because they don't. Not because the mystery has been solved, because it hasn't. But because human beings are naturally drawn toward unanswered questions, especially the ones that refuse to go away. Today, years later, the debates remain, the theories remain, the controversy remains. And the biggest question of all remains exactly where it has always been. Waiting for the person, the document, the confession, or the piece of evidence that finally changes everything. Until then, the mystery survives. The arguments continue. And the news of Chris Watts and Nichole Kessinger remains one of the most discussed, controversial, and endlessly debated mysteries ever to emerge from Frederick, Colorado. A mystery that, despite everything that has happened, may still be far from over. So here we are, years later, thousands of theories, millions of views, endless arguments, and one mystery that still refuses to disappear. Because after everything you've heard tonight, after every timeline, every question, every strange coincidence, every unexplained detail, what do you actually believe? Was Chris Watts the only person who knew what was happening? Or is there still a piece of this news hiding somewhere in the shadows? Because let's be honest, the deeper people dig into Frederick, Colorado, the stranger things seem to become. A controversial timeline, a series of unanswered questions, a mystery that continues to divide researchers across the internet, and a news that refuses to stay buried. Maybe the official version explains everything. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe every question already has an answer. Or maybe the most important answer hasn't surfaced yet. That's what makes this case so fascinating. Not certainty, uncertainty. The fact that years later people are still debating the same questions, still analyzing the same records, still searching for something everyone else may have missed. And perhaps that's exactly why this mystery continues to capture millions of people around the world. Now I want to hear from you. Not a theory, not a rumor, not something you heard from someone else. Just one question. What is the single biggest unanswered question that still bothers you about the Chris Watts case? Drop it in the comments below. Read what others are saying. Challenge their opinions. Share your own perspective. Because some of the most interesting discoveries often begin with a simple question. If you enjoyed this investigation, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the next chapter of this news may be even more controversial than the one you heard today. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.